Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. It's a Sunday, Kevin, and for the first time in almost 2 months, we could talk about a Kansas football win. The Jayhawks snap their 5-game losing streak against Houston with a 42-14 win on Saturday. At times, it didn't feel that straightforward, as maybe the final score would indicate, Kevin, but KU gets the win. It feels like a chance for KU to get some confidence back. That's something Lance Leipold has talked plenty about this year. Is the fact that he felt like this team just needed one win to kind of get the monkey off their back, for lack of a better phrase, and really move on from there. So KU, I think, completely dominated this game, especially I feel like in the second half. But Kevin, for KU, I mean, this feels like the type of win that if you're going to start something, Kevin, and do something special in the second half of the season, this is the type of game you needed.
Yeah, we've talked about it on the show, how they just needed something to go right? Like it didn't have to be a 28-point win. We were saying if you win by butt fumble, just whatever way you have to win, get across that finish line in a positive way. And I think to some extent with the way that they kept losing close games, you're only human, right? And so they're so process oriented, but when the process isn't yielding results, I think it's only human to look back and say, well, what are we doing wrong? What's not right here? And so they just needed something to go right. And in this one, like you said, it wasn't perfect, and they did get tested. And there was a little bit of a time period there where people were probably biting their fingernails a little bit, like, hey, is this going to be another one? And Kansas talks a lot about complementary football. We talk about complementary football when the offense needed the defense to step up because the offense had, a few drives that didn't go well. The defense stepped up and vice versa. And the offense put it away.
Yeah. And look, this wasn't a perfect top to bottom performance.
Yeah.
There were definitely lulls in the game. I think the entire third quarter was a lull. Again, I do the live updates article, and we kind of go by, scores and big plays, interceptions. And I looked down at the end of the third quarter. I was like, I had nothing written because, it was just punts, some longer drives didn't result in much, interception. It wasn't a super impactful quarter, but I think for KU getting off on the right foot, taking a 21-0 lead in this game, I think was super important to not have it from the start, have that, oh boy, here we go again type of feeling. Because that's something Leipold's talked about in the past. If you go back to the 2021 season, he discussed it a lot. The fact that at times during that year when KU would get down early, he noticed on the sideline sometimes players would have the emotion of like, oh boy, here we go again. And in 2022, he talked a lot about how that feeling shifted from, you remember, Kevin, how like in the first 4 weeks of the season, KU kept going down like 14-0.
Yeah.
In those games, and that really shifted that. And it feels like maybe over the first couple weeks of this season, that had maybe returned, where some of the stuff would start to happen, and you could feel, whether it be fans, people in the press box, people on the field, you could just sense that everyone had that, oh boy, here we go again feeling. And for KU to come out, have the 8-minute drive to start the game, really, really set the tone. No explosive plays really outside of 111-yard gain. It was the most 3 yards and a cloud of dust to drive ever. But I feel like that really set the tone for KU of saying to Houston, we are here. We are going to be physical all game. You have to live with it.
Yeah.
And this is a pretty solid, Houston defense. And then obviously Kobe gets the pick. And then from there on, the throw to Skinner, I feel like was really the moment for me when I was like, okay, this looks like a team off a bye week that can have kind of that fresh beginning. So I feel like, Kevin, the starts of the game was just so important for Kansas.
Yeah, I would agree. And you've done a really good job writing about how good Kansas has been with the scripted part of games, right? That's been kind of where the offense has performed really well, and then things have kind of dropped off after that. Arizona State, I thought, even though it was a loss, was maybe a little bit of a turning point in that you had the 2 late drives where Kansas had the come from behind drives in situations where it wasn't scripted. In those situations, this one, Kansas comes out scripted. And like you said, a lot of times with scripted stuff, you're getting chunk plays, but that wasn't the case in this one. Kansas scores 14 points on his first 2 drives on 16 plays. You had a 15-play drive and then a 1-play drive, and so it was so important, I think, for them to finish that first drive with when they face the 4th down and when they face some tough situations in there to make the little 2-yard gain that you had to have on 4th and 1 or that wound up being really important. And then another thing I thought was really big, getting off on the right foot was big. Kansas was wavering at the end of a half. Stop me if you've heard this before. But 28-14, Kansas gets the ball back on offense, quickly punts the ball back. You had the pass to Trevor Cardell that went out of, where he ran out of bounds and stopped the clock, some stuff that didn't go very well. And you're punting the ball back to Houston. It was a lot like UNLV, right? Where you've got the double-digit lead. Everything is looking kind of rosy at that point before half. And then you wind up giving Houston a chance to go down and make it a one-score game with Houston getting the ball on the other side of halftime. And you're thinking, oh, my gosh. Instead, Kansas does get a stop. You get the interception. They go in up 14 rather than up, say, 7. And they were able to kind of outlast Houston through the lull that you were talking about.
And Houston would have gotten the ball back at halftime.
Yeah.
Like, that was the thing when KU punted the ball away. In my head, I'm thinking, okay, if history tells us anything, Houston is going to score here. And KU is not going to get the ball coming out of halftime. Houston's going to score again. It's going to be tied. And then everyone's butts are going to get really tight.
Yep.
And the thing, Kevin, for me, and I talked about this in the post-game video on the field after the game, the thing that is missed from this season, I think, for KU really defensively, has been high leverage plays.
Yeah, I agree.
You think at all these times when there have been these drives to end games or end just halves, period, how many times have there been a high leverage play?
Yep.
There really haven't been that many. And in this game, KU gets that from Kobe in getting another pick. And that is such a huge moment in this game. And I immediately thought back, you mentioned UNLV. Well, I thought back to UNLV because of the end of the half play where Kobe tries to go for the interception to try and make that high leverage play. And he doesn't get it, and obviously, look, we can get into some semantics here, but it's probably a little bit different too when the clock's going to run out. And maybe you shouldn't go for the high leverage play and make the smart play, tackle him. He's in bounds, half ends, you're good. But in this situation, it's very different. Houston had plenty of time left still. And so for KU, I think that was really the moment that solidified all right, this feels different than it has in the past, because this very easily could have been 1-score game at half. Everyone's tight in the locker room. Everyone's tight in the stadium, for the people that were there. And it just becomes a very different situation to manage in the second half.
Yeah, I agree. And then coming out on the other side of the half where Houston has a chance to make it a 1-score game, they just never were able to. And I felt like those were high leverage situations like you're talking about as well, where you're kind of like, hey, we got to get off the field here. We can't allow them to go through and score points and make this a game where everybody kind of puckers up. And with the defense getting those stops in the lull that you've been talking about, it allowed the offense, I think, to regather itself and put this thing away. But there were some spots in there where it was a little hairy. I will say, too, one of the interesting things to me, and Brian Borland is not a pressure-heavy guy, generally speaking. He basically feels like, hey, play your assignment. We should have answers to this if everybody does their jobs. In this one, Kansas, I felt like defensively was so much more proactive with the pressure that they were sending. They wound up with 6 sacks. Of those 6, Swain, 4, they sent 5 or more guys. And another one, they showed 5 guys before they sent 4. And so Kansas, I think this season we've talked about how one of the things that they really had a goal of is limiting explosive plays, right? Make the other team take a pick and chisel and have to chisel their way all the way downfield
For sure.
little by little, but they haven't done it well. I mean, they've still given up the explosive plays. And so in this case, it almost felt like Borland was saying, you know what, this may be riskier, but if we're giving up the big plays anyway, we might as well be a little bit more proactive with it. I haven't seen the blitz rates, but I would assume just from watching it, it felt like Kansas was heavier on pressure than they typically are.
Kevin, they for sure were. Like, they for sure were. Like, it was not a lot of the stuff that drives fans nuts and even pulls my hair out at times, where you see 4 guys rush, nobody gets any pressure, and then there are 7 guys back, and then there's a soft spot in the zone that the opposing team hits, or the quarterback runs for a first down. And look, Kevin, 3 of Houston's 5 third down conversions came on quarterback scrambles. So that was still an issue. And KU still gave up some big plays, right? I think I put in the post game article for VIPs, it was something like 11 or 12 explosive plays where it's basically 15 yards through the air, 10 yards through the ground. It's still some things defensively that you're like, oh boy. But I think you can look at the pressure that they tried to crank up against a really bad Houston offensive line, and it really worked. And I think that's a positive thing for KU to look at and say, okay, against the lines that are maybe middle of the road in the Big 12 or under, maybe you do decide to turn up the pressure on them and really crowd the pocket, where then there isn't as much space for a quarterback that's maybe mobile to get out and run. If you watched the Iowa State UCF game last night, UCF did an awful job of containing Rocco. And Rocco's not Rocco Beck for Iowa State, the quarterback, is not a scrambler. And I wonder for KU, if you play this forward a couple weeks to when KU plays Iowa State, maybe that line that is probably middle of the road Big 12 offensive line, maybe you do decide to blitz, keep Rocco in there, make him throw through pressure. Maybe that's how you can start to develop some things with this defense. So I think you're right, Kevin. Like, seeing KU blitz like that was just kind of refreshing.
Yeah, sure. And this is a bigger picture thing, but we've now had 3 different years in a row where Kansas has come off the bye week, kind of with fire in their lungs, right? When you look at the Oklahoma State game that they won to become bowl eligible in 2022, when you look at the Oklahoma win a year ago, and now this one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is how fresh Kansas seems to be coming off of these. They play fast, they play downhill. It's very apparent that whatever their bye week plan is, it's been working, because they've come out on the other sides of those things really well. In this one, I did like some of the changes and some of the shifts, to your point, when they did rush for it in some of those situations and there was a scramble play. I felt like a lot of times it opened up late, and that's the issue with not sending pressure, right? Is if the quarterback is sitting back there for 5 seconds, somebody is bound to get out of their rush lane over the course of 5 seconds. And that's really difficult to put that on a defense. You add one more guy where maybe the quarterback doesn't have that extra time to wait for somebody to get out of position, and all of a sudden the sacks start piling up. The tackles for loss were fantastic in this one. You look at the 3 interceptions, the 12 tackles for loss, the 6 sacks. This was an explosive play defense against Houston in this one. And like you were saying, I'm not saying Houston's one of the better offenses in the Big 12. I think they really struggle. And even with Deion Chris having the game that he did against TCU, if you look at their offensive numbers from that game, they weren't super great either. And so this was a group that you could do that against. I'm interested from a big picture standpoint, how much of this can you take forward against a K-State or an Iowa State over the next few weeks?
And that's really what we're going to learn, Kevin, right, about this team is was this you played a group of 5 team.
Yeah.
Let's be real here.
Yeah.
You played a group of 5 team, and obviously UNLV is also a group of 5 team, and they won that game. So for me, Kevin, I think you can say defensively for KU, we're going to learn a lot next week.
Yep.
Because if you watch the K-State game against West Virginia, if you've watched K-State twice this year, you can see that is an offense that can move the ball and can do it. And KU's going to be tested a few different ways, right? Yep. Avery Johnson really hasn't run that much lately, but he's a scrambling quarterback who's a great athlete. He had
the hip thing against Colorado where he took like a shot and had to leave the game for a while. And then I think he came back in and then went back to the locker room a second time. And since then, he hasn't run a lot. And I'm not saying that he still has the hip injury, but you do wonder if maybe they're being a little bit more careful with him. But you would obviously think Sunflower Showdown, those if he's still feeling good about running, the gloves are kind of coming off on that thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I think KU defensively will very much be tested. I will say it was really positive to see Cornell Wheeler back in the game.
Yes.
Obviously, his top end speed is not there right now. You could see that on, I think, the second touchdown for Houston, where I think he was trying to chase him down. Look, you're never going to be a top speed if you've got a massive brace on your knee. Like, that's going to be really hard to do. But to see him out there, the defense, Kevin, just looks so much more solid. And again, Houston's offense, not very good. But he's in the right spots. And KU has severely missed that with him being gone. And he just knows where to be and how to approach the ball carrier. Doesn't miss many tackles, even when he's not 100%. I just think he looked like the type of guy when you see him, you're like, man, KU really missed his presence and everything that he offers you at that Mike linebacker position.
K-State is so good at using your momentum against you, right? They get you kind of leaning right and the ball goes left. And I think with what you're talking about with Cornell not just being in the right spot himself, but making sure everybody else is as well, he could come in really valuable in that circumstance. But if you wanted to get him, quote unquote, up to speed, get his sea legs back, however you want to refer to it, Houston was a great game to do that with because you could get him a decent number of snaps. Do you know how many snaps he played? I know you always do your Pro Football Focus.
Give me a second. I can get you that. I think he was about 25 because he and Blake Harrell are both. Yeah. It was a very round number for Cornell, which made me wonder if they did a snap count with him.
Yeah.
But yeah, here, one real quick. 25 for Cornell. Interesting enough, only 5 run plays when he was on the field.
Yeah.
Random analysis doesn't mean anything, probably not. But
no, but he's also very good in those situations. And if you wanted to get him back for Kansas State and have him be back, you needed him to play, say, 25 snaps against Houston, and then you can potentially ramp him up to, say, 50 next week. And so this was a perfect sort of first step for him on that road back.
Exactly. So it was good to see him back. Look, also huge shout out to Taylor Davis and Caleb Purdy, 2 guys playing at safety that really have not played a lot of football. You didn't really notice them. I think there was maybe 2 plays where I noticed Caleb Purdy out there. And if you're playing on the back end of a defense and you didn't get an interception, it's best if we didn't really notice you.
Yeah.
Because it means you're in the right spots. It means you're tackling really well. We're not seeing you sprawled on the grass as a guy's running 20 yards downfield because you slipped or you missed a tackle. So I thought Taylor Davis looked like the real deal for a redshirt freshman.
Yeah.
Again, got to quantify that. He is someone that I think is going to be a guy to watch if he can continue to improve, because that's the thing, Kevin. You can hear about it behind the scenes with guys where, hey, they look good in their first camp or look good in their freshman year. Well, guess what? Can you get better? A lot of people can come in and show flashes, but flashes don't get you anywhere, right? You got to be consistent. And so I think for someone like Taylor Davis to come in and be consistent, is so important for KU just this year and the long term, because I really don't know the latest on the Dye brothers and Mason Ellis and when they'll be back.
Yeah, especially at safety. Safety even more than other positions. Consistency is more important than, say, being somebody who flashes. And so I think, to your point, the fact that, especially with Taylor Davis, like you said, there were a couple plays, I think, with Caleb Purdy that, maybe, you had the pass interference, you had a play on the back end where, it looked like maybe he was a little out of position. With Taylor Davis, you didn't really notice him. And that's, a good field safety is a lot like an insurance policy, right? Like you never want to use it. It's, and so I thought Taylor Davis played really, really well in that circumstance. And to be quite frank, against Arizona State, I didn't notice him a ton either, positively or negatively, which is not really a negative thing either.
No, exactly. Exactly. So, all right, let's get to offense, Kevin. I can't believe
Yeah.
I feel like this is the first time in a long time we started with defense. It feels
Yeah.
like you were like, all right, offense, let's talk Jalen
Yeah.
Daniels.
Let's get there.
Let's talk some Jalen Daniels, Kevin. The Pro Football Focus grade, you mentioned that a minute ago for defense. Look, Jalen's grade of 91 is his highest since the Duke game in 2022. It just puts into perspective how elite he was. And I'm really sorry for folks that weren't at the game. ESPN Plus screwed you. No, literally, Kevin. I tried to go back and watch some of these throws again, and the camera angles are terrible. The camera following the ball and then stopping when the ball's still going. You're just like, what's going on? Jalen Daniels was awesome yesterday. And some of the
throw
throws
to
he was
Trevor
making.
Wilson, them butchering that camera angle was
Yeah, that was tough.
that was
But Jalen, I mean, look, that's the best he's looked in a long time. And it's so interesting, Kevin. I want to get your opinion on this because we've heard Jeff Grimes and Lance Leipold talk about the rust, and not really saying rust, but if you can read between the words here of what they're trying to say, it's taken Jalen some time to knock off some of the rust. And some of that is the fact that he's not played a lot of football. Some of that is the way that KU handled things with him between spring and camp, where he really didn't do a lot. And also just the fact that there were injuries to other guys, like Lawrence Arnold really wasn't doing a whole lot until I think midway through camp. And now all of a sudden you're seeing this offense start to click, and the deep passing game was back, and the middle of the field was back in the passing game. Like things just looked better for KU, and that's super big.
Yeah, they looked crisp. And look, I know it seems like a hyper specific thing to say, but how many times have we heard Jeff Grimes say we're facing one safety right now? If it's cover 3 or if it's cover 1, they're only putting one guy back there, and that's basically because Kansas wasn't able to test people down the field, and so people were getting that extra safety up into the box, making the run game a little bit more difficult. And the thing you really wanted to see from Jalen is, can he make a team pay for not having guys deep? And I thought the Arizona State game was obviously a really positive step. I'll be honest with you, the TCU game, the stats were brutal. But if you remember, we talked about it on the show, the Pro Football Focus grade was actually above average for the TCU game, even though he had, really poor, counting numbers. You had drops, you had situations where, nobody was open. You had all kinds of different things impacting what Jalen's numbers were. My whole point, and I probably talked too much in saying it, is I feel like this has been coming, right? Like I feel like he was a little bit better against West Virginia than he was against UNLV. I thought he was actually better against TCU, despite the counting numbers, than he was against West Virginia. I thought he was better against Arizona State than he was against TCU. And, this was his best game yet. And so this has been a process where he has been getting better. To your point, too, you think about, like you said, the fact that Jalen hasn't played a lot of football, obviously being out with the injury last year, kind of wrapping him in bubble wrap through the offseason. And then when he comes back, don't forget in fall camp, quarterbacks aren't live. And so it's really tough to simulate in practice what it's like for a quarterback in a game. And so you would love it if, hey, practice got him fully ready for everything. But I'm just not sure that was realistic. And I'll be the first to admit, I thought, hey, from what we'd seen at practice, and it was pretty brief, I thought, hey, it's business as usual with Jalen. He's bouncing around. He's just great. I didn't see the early struggles that he would have had. But I think that once they saw those, once they diagnosed those, and hey, credit where credit's due, Jeff Grimes has taken a lot of criticism, as you know. And one of the things that I think Grimes has done pretty well is he's been malleable. He's been willing to adjust. And some of the concepts that they were throwing in the first few weeks that weren't working, how many times do you see RPO bubble anymore? How many times do you see some of the things that they were running that weren't working versus some of the things that they found that have worked? They've run more option. They've done more things that maybe weren't in Grimes's wheelhouse. And so I do think that he's continued to tinker and sort of find that perfect ground where it's, hey, this is what I'm comfortable calling. This is what I'm comfortable our offense being. But also this is what the players can execute and do well.
Yeah. So going back to Jalen really quick, Kevin,
Yeah.
you know, there's a difference. And I think the big thing that was missing with Jalen was the deep passes.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, sure, he was, you look at some of the games and like his completion rate, 10 yards and in was really good. It was like in the 90%. But once you got 10 yards and further, he was down in, 30%. The big difference in this game I feel like you saw from Jalen is the fact that those throws 10 plus yards down the field were like really well placed.
Yep.
And the timing was really good with the receivers.
Yep.
And that is something that when you think about the TCU game, Kevin, that was really missing. There's the deep pass to Luke Grimm that is there maybe 2 yards off in terms of where the ball landed and where Luke was in his route.
Yeah.
You can look at the Quentin Skinner dropping the ball. LJ Arnold dropping the ball, right? Things weren't crisp. And this is the first time this season things have looked crisp. And Jalen, going back to that 10 plus yards throws, he was over 50% in this game. And to put that in perspective, Jason Bean was about 55% last year.
Yep.
So finally, this is the first game where that entire field stretching element was back. And that's going to be really important for KU going forward. Now, for the whole offense, I think it's been really interesting to watch the progression of things where screen passes are gone. Some of the jet motion stuff is changed, has been tweaked a little bit. What I love right now is some of the timing of when KU is running this reverse.
Yes.
And that play, I mean, it's now worked. It worked against West Virginia really well. It's worked against Houston really well. And there was one other one against UNLV.
Arizona State, I think, too, right?
Yeah, maybe Arizona. But yeah, it's basically like KU goes to it once a game, more or less. Yep. And they tried to go to it again with Trevor Wilson, and he danced too much. But generally, I feel like the timing of the play calls for KU have gotten a lot better.
I agree.
And it hasn't felt as predictable. Where I think early in the season, Kevin, when KU lined up, we kind of knew generally what was going to happen based on who's on the field, based on where guys are lined up. And right now it feels a lot more unpredictable. And obviously a part of that is coming off a bye week. You've got extra time to prepare. You've got extra time to game plan. But I think generally for KU, the offense has trended in a really nice direction. And you've seen an offensive coordinator get comfortable with the players he has. And that's really important.
I also think, too, continuing on with Jalen and the offense, the running game with Jalen was terrific against Houston. He runs for 58 yards, but even in addition to that, what do you have, like an 11 or a 12-yard run, like called back for a hold as well? I think he had another, it was like a 10-plus yard run. But when Jalen Daniels is averaging 8 yards a carry like he was in this one, it opens a lot of other things up. You can do some fun things with that. And Jalen has an aptitude for running option. I think he reads those things really well. And it's been interesting to see the offense kind of change from that perspective too. And look, like there were some people that, either whether KU fans, whether opposing fans, felt like Jalen was a bit of a glass cannon coming into this year because of the last two injuries. One of the things that you and I had talked about was, hey, these two injuries were not the same. Getting driven onto your throwing shoulder against TCU is very different than having a lingering back injury. Jalen has been really physical as a runner. He's taken some real shots. At this point in the season, I don't think there's any doubt that I don't think anybody's calling plays at this point worried that, hey, Jalen's going to take a shot and he's not going to continue. I think everybody has kind of gotten back to that cycle of, okay, this is normal. This is what we should be doing with Jalen. I thought he did really well with his legs as well.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And the option game, I feel like, is being called at really nice times. Some of the QB draws KU was running were really great calls. Obviously, going to the speed option, the kind of a bread and butter play for KU, came at a great time on that fourth down. I think you're right, Kevin. Like the option game with Jalen, it is not as frequent as it was, and it's not as easy to spot sometimes.
Yep.
Where you remember in 2022, it looked like triple option at times early in that year. It is not looking as straightforward or as complex as that. but KU's going to it, I feel like, at really good times. And Jalen is showing some durability right now. I'm sure KU fans are going to yell at both of us for talking about injuries because,
Yeah.
because we
I'm not
definitely have an
calling.
impact on it, Kevin.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think generally right now, Jalen has trended up every week. Devin Neal in the run game is consistently elite. Another game where KU averages over 6 yards per carry, another game where it's over 150 yards rushing. If you look at any sort of the advanced metrics, Kevin, I posted these on our message board, for VIPs over the last couple of weeks. Like KU is in the top 5 nationally in EPA of play, which basically measures how good are you doing compared to expectation running the ball. And
Yep.
that's how far ahead KU is of expectation versus like your average, potential gain on a play. And now all of a sudden you're adding this passing attack, and that should theoretically lighten the box a little bit. Maybe you don't see so much of the cover one with 8 guys, 7 guys in the box. Maybe now you do see some 6-man boxes, or maybe it's a 7-man box with a 2 set, whatever. This should theoretically help expand the KU offense to be just more diverse, and should help a guy like Devin Neal potentially break the all-time leading rushing yard record at K-State next week, which is kind of cool too.
Yeah. I'm sure we're going to get into the K-State game a little bit, but I mean, how cool would that be to be a kid from Lawrence and potentially have the chance to set that record against K-State? And if KU manages to pull something out there, I mean, that would be a dream for a kid from Lawrence. But yeah, and I'm interested to see what the injury report says with Highshaw. I think Daniel Highshaw was playing really well. And was really having a nice season so far. Left the game, as you said, up in the press box, pretty early in this one. They wound up going in other directions. I like one of the other things that's kind of popped up, Swain, that I've really liked that they've done is they've gotten the running backs involved in the passing attack. And they've been able to find ways to get Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw the ball outside of a box that has, 8 or 9 guys lined up to stop them. And so I do think that's been another little bit of a creative wrinkle. How about Trevor Cardell getting a 32-yard catch in this one? I mean, that's another thing is I think the last couple years you've been able to count on the tight end position, not just to catch the ball, but to have explosive plays. It felt like Mason Fairchild really was responsible for a lot of their explosive plays. And so if they can find a way to open things up to the tight end a little bit, even if it's not a ton, but just here and there where it's something that somebody has to respect, all of a sudden you're starting to show different wrinkles that people have to kind of keep an eye on.
Exactly. And I feel like the tight ends, Kevin, have been missing.
Yeah.
For most of this season. And Jared Casey gets 2 touchdowns, right? First time in his career that he's gotten 2 touchdowns in a single game. That was a stat that I heard we were told in the press box, Kevin, and that one shocked me. Just because it feels like he's been a guy that has caught touchdown passes. He doesn't get a lot of passes kind of in between the 20s. But he's been someone that on, high leverage downs or in the red zone, he does get targets. Yeah, that's what I've got. I mean, anything else on the offense, Kevin? We can move on to K-State, and then I want to talk about one recruiting thing at the end.
No, I think the offense. I mean, we hit on the major stuff. When Jalen is playing like that, I think it's so huge for this program, and not just the offense, but I think Kansas derives so much of its kind of energy from Jalen, and I think when you've seen them in the past make some of the comebacks that you've talked about from being down a couple scores, I really do think that some of that is that people have been able to draw energy from Jalen and how excitable he gets, all of those different things. And I really think that that's something to watch looking forward is, hey, if Jalen is playing like Jalen, I think the confidence of the entire roster kind of raises as well.
Exactly. And I think this weekend against K-State, it's going to be a big test of that.
Yes, it will.
It's going to be a big test of that because I think this K-State team it is really good, especially I think offensively. Avery's done a good job. They've got good wide receivers. Giddens is a good running back. The line, Kevin, for this game opened up at 9.5. The line for this game opened up at 7. And it's now been bet, I think, to 9.5. It was as high as 11 at one point, someone told me. And then it's back down to 9. Like, this to me feels like these games are always close. It feels like it's going to be another one-score game where it's going to come down to who doesn't F it up.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this game has been in recent years. And for KU, last year they messed it up with the muff punt and interceptions. And this year, I think it's going to be really about, can the offense play clean football? Can the defense just not get gashed? And if that happens, KU's going to be in this game, because that's how the Big 12 is, right? There's very, very thin margin of error for every single team. And if KU cannot make those killer mistakes, this is a game I think KU should be in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think K-State is going to be hopping mad for a few different reasons. One of them is they're usually that way at home against just about anybody. I think another one is they take this game really seriously. I think the other thing is, though, they've been listening to an offseason, and some of those K-State players are pretty online, as you know, of people basically saying, hey, KU would have won last year if their backup quarterback wasn't in the game. And I think they're probably tired of hearing that and wanting to come out and make a statement. Even so, I think Kansas feels like they let one slip away a year ago, one that they should have had. In addition to the stuff you're talking about, there's a dropped pick six, basically, that KU could have had that could have put that thing away almost in the third quarter. You had a blocked extra point that was run back, where if that didn't happen, KU is kicking a field goal on its next to last possession rather than Ballard throwing a YOLO ball into the end zone because it's fourth down and you have to give your players a chance. Instead of that, you're kicking maybe for a chance to be right there as well. And so, to your point, the last 2 years, I think, and 2 years ago, it was separated by more points. But even so, it was a game that KU was in except for KU's mistakes. And that's going to be the thing to watch for KU. Is I think this is a team that they have a lot of pride. I think you saw that even during the losing streak when we were talking to them. This is a group that has a lot of pride. I think this is a game that they can say the next game is the most important one. I think this is one they've had circled. But even if they play well, I think a lot of this is going to hinge on, can they keep the mistakes down? And it's not just turnovers, but turnovers is part of it. And I'm going to knock on the biggest piece of wood I can say this when I say this, Swain. One turnover over the last 3 games, and that turnover against TCU came at the very end of the game when the game was over. TCU was up double digits. Like, it wasn't a turnover that really impacted the game. And so they played clean ball from a turnover standpoint the last 3 weeks. Can you carry that over against a team like K-State that really makes you pay for when you turn the ball over? Can guys stay in their gaps and not give up, rush lanes for Avery to scramble, things like that? This game is going to be decided, I think, on those sorts of margins.
It is, and it always is, Kevin. And you think back 2 years ago, right, when KU goes to K-State, O.J. Burrows muffs that punt early in the game after KU's defense gets a stop, and that really flipped the game on its head. And that was also when Jalen was just coming back from the injury as well. So this will be a really highly, I think, anticipated game, because you're right. And look, all these players are online. They're all everyone's way too online these days. I'm sure myself included. So everyone sees everything. Right.
Yeah.
And if people are telling you they don't see stuff, they're lying to you. So that's what's going to make it interesting. And I like that, Kevin.
Yeah.
Give me some smack talk. That's like the whole, we don't see anything, yes. Okay. You respect every opponent. That's great. But let's get some smack talk going, and like what I think it was Kobe Bryant. Said we've got it in K-State. And then Avery quote tweeted him saying something like, yeah, sure. Or that's fun. It's harmless.
It is.
So I think these are 2 teams that I think have been looking forward to this game. I'm really interested, and with it being a 7:00 kick too, that's going to be a cauldron. So it's going to be this is why college football is awesome, Kevin, because this is going to be a fun game. It's a team that KU can give up a lot of points, but this offense can also score a lot of points, and K-State's offense can score a lot of points too. So I think this should be a really, really fun football game and fun environment and atmosphere. And it's really going to test KU and see if this Houston game was an indication of what the second half is going to look like, or if it was an indication of just how bad this Houston team is and how lucky they got against TCU to be four up in the turnover battle.
Yeah, I think too, none of the pressure's on KU, right? Like, this is a game that you're supposed to lose.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when you're in that situation, you play really well because some of the pressure is off. And I think, Devin Neal was unbelievable in the game a year ago, and kind of, I don't want to say single-handedly, but, really was a big part of the reason that KU built a lead and was in position to potentially win that thing. Even with Kansas kind of avoiding throwing the ball because Cole Ballard was in his first ever college start as a true freshman. I think Kansas's offense, it can move the ball in K-State. I really do. I think Kansas has a chance to score points in this one. Defensively, can you get off the field? Can you put K-State into 3rd and 8 and then get a stop? And if you watched the K-State West Virginia game last night, West Virginia kind of shut down the K-State running game. There wasn't a whole lot there. And Kansas's defensive tackles, I think, have been one of the strengths of this team. They've been part of the reason they've been so good against designed run. And so you're able to get K-State behind the chains. We'll find out pretty quickly whether, Borland sending pressure with how well they're able to do all of that, if that was a 1-week thing or if that's something that we're going to continue to see from here on out.
Yeah. So it should be a fun one.
Yeah.
One last thing, Kevin. Let's get to some recruiting. And if this may not even run, if this doesn't happen on Sunday by the time I want to post this, but we'll probably hold it until then. So the big news on Sunday is going to be that Juju Marks is going to flip to Nebraska.
Yeah.
He will be leaving KU's class. He's going to go to Nebraska now. And it's the first defection for Kansas in this high school class. It's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
You start 1-5. It's going to be hard to keep guys, especially guys that were somewhat sought after, became more sought after some staff moves at Nebraska. This is something that has been kind of rumbling for a little bit. Or some rumors maybe a month ago that Juju was going to visit Nebraska. He did not end up visiting Lincoln. He will go see Nebraska in, I think, 2 weeks when they have another home game. So for KU, it's obviously it's how it goes. You win football games, you keep your recruits. KU did that last year. And for this year, they've not done that. They've tried, and you can do what you can, but sometimes also there are kids that, I don't know, want to change it and go somewhere different. So what's kind of your reaction, Kevin? I think for KU, like, this will be a much bigger loss in terms of optics, right? Losing tied highest rated player in the class, in-state recruit, rather than on-field football impact. That's just my opinion, though, after I've seen him play a couple times.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And we actually had Juju on our Verbal Commitment podcast for week 1 because we went out to see Mill Valley and Olathe South. And our good friend Ryan Wallace and I kind of left that game saying, we don't think Juju's going to stick in KU's class then. And it wasn't Nebraska. Actually, in the interview, he was talking about, we said, hey, are you planning on going to any KU games? And he goes, man, he's like, I'm so excited to go see KU Colorado. I got to see Coach Prime. And it's like, well, okay, when you go see your team you're committed to, you don't usually talk about how excited you are to see the other team there. And so I think that was an indication. To your point, though, Juju's got potential. He does. He's got size. He's got length. He's a pretty good athlete for how big he is. The motor has to get so much better. And that's something that that we said when he was committed to KU. That's something that we're saying now. We'll continue to say. From that perspective, I think it was a good swing for KU to take. And you and I have talked a lot about KU's recruitment of Dominique Orange, right? Kind of a similar situation where Dominique was a guy that coming out of his sophomore year had like an offer from Georgia, a bunch of really big schools. And then teams kind of watched him play and they were kind of like, he's not really developing. He's not really showing the effort. He wound up, I feel like kind of coming down to Iowa State and Kansas, where Dominique Orange's kind of final few and he goes to Iowa State. And Iowa State kind of felt like the same way KU did, I think, where if you have a good culture in your program, you can take some of these guys that are talented, that aren't firing for one reason or another, and you can try and kind of assimilate them, if you will, into your culture, and they come out on the other side. It worked with Dominique Orange, and KU fans are going to see that, unfortunately, when KU plays Iowa State here in a few weeks. I think with Juju, that was kind of the hope, right? It wasn't, this guy is this good right now. It wasn't, hey, this guy's going to come in and play early in his career. It was always going to be a developmental thing. But you were hoping getting him in your program with a coach like Gildersleeve, getting him around the guys in your program that have this established work ethic and culture, that was going to rub off and you were going to potentially hit big. And so from that perspective, it is a loss. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, what you're talking about, and I don't work for 24/7 anymore, so I feel like I can say this. I'm not sure the rankings on KU's class are quite where I would have them if I were doing the rankings. I probably would have had Juju, say like 5, 6, 7 or so in the class, as opposed to being sort of, is he number 2 right now? I know he's an 89 and McCorkle's an 89.
Yeah, McCorkle shows up on the commit list above him, so you can just say he's number 2.
Okay. And to me, I've said this before, I think McComb should be a 90. As somebody who's been involved in the recruiting process, who has scouted guys, I think McComb should be a 90. I think Garrett Martin should be an 89 with McCorkle. You don't think so?
No.
I'm a fan of Garrett Martin. And,
okay.
And if you talk to Ryan, actually, he saw him in person at K-State's camp, and he killed everybody there. And so okay. I'm a Garrett Martin fan. Sounds like you disagree. No. But I would have Juju a few spots, down that. Rather than 89, I think he's more like an 86. And like, that's, again, I think an 86, you look at somebody like an Adrian Hawley, I think he's a guy that has some tools, has some potential, isn't there as a football player. And I think when you look at where Juju's at, that's a fairly similar way to look at him. And Adrian Hawley is currently rated as an 86. So it sounds like you disagree with me on Martin. But my general point was just that people are going to look at it and say, okay, you lost one of the highest rated guys. I'm not sure he would have been one of my highest rated guys. It is a loss because he is a high potential guy and is a guy that theoretically, if he figured things out, could really help you on the other end. It was going to take some work to get there.
Yeah. I think he's a guy that's a high range of outcomes.
Yeah.
Right. If you look at and you say he goes into college and everything goes right, changes, however you want to frame it. Yeah, you got a multi-year starter at tackle, potentially at guard, if he can put on the weight and things change. But the floor is also a lot lower because it's someone that does not play a lot of offensive line, and you pointed it out, all the other stuff too. So that's a good idea, though, Kevin. I might do that. I might do a class ranking for myself in December.
We can have Garrett Martin significantly lower than I would, though.
No, 89. That's whoa. That's high. I think he's pretty solid at 87. But that's when we talk about in December. But
sure,
that's probably going to be it. If you didn't hear all the recruiting chat, that means the recruiting thing didn't happen, and I had to cut that. And if you did, now you know. I'll have a post up on VIP about kind of more on the stuff I'm hearing about everything that basically happened and what goes into a decision like this for high school prospects. So that's what I've got. Kevin, thanks so much for joining. What else you got?
I was just going to say, the one other thing that people should look at too is KU scholarship tight in terms of what they need to do in the transfer portal too. Yeah. And so losing on Juju Marks, like I said, like, it is a loss. I'm not going to act like it isn't. But that's also another scholarship that you can use to address sort of immediate needs with the way that they're going to hit the portal this offseason, which is going to be a big portal class.
That it is. It's going to be a big portal class, Kevin. It's going to make for a very interesting December.
I do not envy you having to chase down all the portal stuff. So
yeah, that'll be fun. I'll really enjoy it. Yeah, it'll be really fascinating to see how it plays out, Kevin. But that's a different conversation for December when signing day is like the first week of December. That's what we got. Next time I talk, Kevin, it'll be after the Sunflower Showdown.
Yeah.
I wonder if it'll be a jovial podcast. We'll have to see. Thanks always for listening, though. We'll have another podcast in the middle of this week talking to Tim Fitzgerald of GoPowerCat.com. We'll talk some KUK State. I'm sure we'll talk some stadium stuff for some fun chuckles. But thanks always for listening. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel if that's where you're watching this. If you're listening on your podcast platform of choice, please leave us a rating and review. Those go a long way in helping us out, reach a whole new audience of Kansas fans. That's what we're about here, trying to get as many fans as we can to be on the same page, talk some Kansas football, and take it all in. So, as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you all again in a few days.